What if I told you that the 7% of traders who actually make money are doing the exact opposite of what you think success looks like? They're not trying harder. They're not analyzing more. They're not even trying to be right. In fact, the harder you try to do what everyone says successful traders do, study more setups, master more indicators, develop iron discipline, the further you get from that 7%. Because here's what nobody tells you. The 7% aren't better at trading. They're better at being wrong. They've mastered something that has nothing to do with markets and everything to do with how they hold their own mind when money is on the line. The skills that got you into trading are the exact skills keeping you out of that 7%. And until you unlearn what you think success means, you're going to stay exactly where you are. If you've been trading for 6 months, a year, maybe longer, and you're still struggling, still breaking even, still giving back gains, still feeling like you're one insight away from cracking the code, then you need to hear this. You're not failing because you don't know enough. You're failing because you're trying to succeed by the wrong rules. The 7% of traders who consistently make money aren't doing what the trading industry tells you to do. They're not spending more hours watching charts. They're not collecting more strategies. They're not developing superhuman discipline. They've learned a completely different game. A psychological game where the skill isn't predicting the market, it's managing yourself in the face of not knowing. Here's the core misunderstanding that keeps 93% trapped. You think the difference between you and profitable traders is knowledge. Better setups, better timing, better analysis, but the real difference is psychological infrastructure. The 7% have built internal systems that allow them to execute without needing to know they're right, lose without it meaning anything about their competence, win without getting attached to always winning, trade the same way whether they're up or down, and hold uncertainty without anxiety destroying their clarity. And here's the myth we're busting today. The idea that the 7% are more disciplined, more focused, more committed. The truth is they've learned to operate with less effort, not more. They've discovered that trying to control uncertainty creates the anxiety that destroys execution. They've learned that the harder you grip, the less you can hold. This video will show you the exact psychological shifts that move traders from the 93% into the 7%. Not theory, actual internal reframes that change how you experience trading. You'll learn why most traders get progressively worse the more they study, and how the 7% avoid that trap. You'll learn how to build what I call probabilistic consciousness, the ability to hold multiple possible outcomes without needing to know which will happen. And you'll learn the 5 internal markers that tell you you're transitioning from the 93% into the 7%. This isn't about working harder, it's about working on the right thing, your internal game, not your external skills. Let me tell you about 2 traders I met in the same class. Both started with similar capital, similar intelligence, similar determination. 1 year later, Trader 1 was consistently profitable, growing their account steadily. Trader 2 had blown up twice and quit. What was the difference? It wasn't knowledge. They learned the same system. It wasn't discipline. Trader 2 actually followed rules more rigidly. The difference was this. Trader 1 learned to trade like they were playing an infinite game where any single trade meant nothing. Trader 2 kept treating every trade like a final exam where their worth was being graded. Watch Trader 2 take a loss. Their jaw would tighten, their breathing would change, and you could see them calculating what this loss meant about them. I should have seen that coming. I'm not as good as I thought. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. They'd made trading about their identity, so every loss was an identity crisis. And you can't think clearly during an identity crisis. You defend, you justify, you do whatever it takes to not feel inadequate. And all of those responses destroy your trading. You move stops. You revenge trade. You double down to prove you weren't wrong. You're not trading anymore. You're managing your ego. Trader 1, they'd lose and literally shrug. Not because they didn't care, because they'd separated the outcome from their self-worth. They saw losses as data, not judgments. So they could execute the next trade with a clear head while Trader 2 was still emotionally processing the last trade, trying to prove they weren't the person who makes mistakes. And here's what's profound about this. The 7% all have this in common. They've severed the connection between outcomes and identity. That's not a technique you learn in a weekend. That's a way of being. That's a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself and to uncertainty. And until you make that shift, you'll never join them. You can have the best system in the world, the most accurate analysis, the perfect risk management. But if your identity is tied to outcomes, you will sabotage yourself at the exact moment you need to execute cleanly. So what if everything you think you need to do to become a successful trader is actually preventing you from becoming one? What if the effort is the problem? What if the studying is the trap? What if the discipline you're trying to develop is creating the rigidity that keeps you from adapting? Let me tell you a story that's going to make this clear. Imagine someone trying to learn to swim by reading books about swimming, watching videos, studying technique. They know everything about proper form, breathing patterns, stroke mechanics, but they won't get in the water because they're not good enough yet. They need to master it first, then they'll swim. That's insane, right? You can't learn to swim without getting in the water. You'll be bad at first. You'll swallow water. You'll panic. But that's not failure. That's the learning process. The only way to learn to swim is to get in the water and be bad at swimming until you're not bad at it anymore. Yet this is exactly what 93% of traders do. They're trying to master trading before they trade. They're trying to eliminate uncertainty before entering uncertainty. They're trying to not be bad at something before they've done it enough to get good. The 7% understands something profound. Mastery in trading doesn't come from knowing more before you start. It comes from learning to be okay with not knowing while you're in it. They get in the water, they're okay being uncertain, they're okay looking stupid on some trades. They're okay with the learning process being messy and uncomfortable. And paradoxically, that comfort with discomfort is what allows them to develop real skill. Because when you're comfortable being uncomfortable, you can take trades that don't feel perfect. You can execute when you're uncertain. You can hold positions when you're afraid. You can do the things that actually make money instead of the things that make you feel safe. The 93% are waiting for certainty before they fully commit. The 7% have learned to fully commit to uncertainty. One group is reading books by the side of the pool, getting more knowledgeable and more frozen. The other group is in the water, getting better by being willing to be worse first. And here's what's brutal about this. The more you study without executing, the higher your standards become, the more perfect you need things to be before you act. So you actually get worse at taking action the more you prepare. You're building a prison of knowledge where you know so much that nothing ever looks good enough to trade. The 7% avoid this trap by staying in the water, by executing imperfectly, by learning through doing rather than learning through studying. So what if the path to that 7% runs directly through everything you're trying to avoid? What if you have to be willing to be uncertain, to look stupid, to make mistakes, to lose in ways that feel embarrassing? Because that's where the learning is. That's where the transformation happens. Not in your study, not in your preparation, but in your willingness to be in the arena being imperfect. Now let me talk about the single biggest difference between the 7% and everyone else. It's how they think about any individual trade. The 93% think I need this trade to work. The 7% think this is one trade in a series of thousands I'll make in my career. Do you see how different those two thoughts are? When you need a specific trade to work, you're no longer trading probability, you're trading hope. You'll hold losers too long because you need them to come back. You'll exit winners too early because you need to lock in being right. You'll see patterns that aren't there because you need an opportunity. That need distorts everything. It's like looking at the world through a lens that warps reality to match what you need to see, instead of what's actually there. The 7% have internalized something profound. Any single trade is statistically meaningless. It's noise. One flip of a coin in an infinite series of flips. They can lose this trade and 5 more after it without it affecting their confidence or their execution because they're not judging themselves by singles. They're judging themselves by whether they executed their process. Think about what that means. It means they've removed the emotional charge from any individual outcome. This trade doesn't threaten them. This loss doesn't mean anything. This win doesn't validate them. It's just data. It's just one expression of probability in a vast ocean of probability. And here's the reframe I want you to make right now. Stop asking, did I make money after each trade? Start asking, did I execute my process? A perfectly executed losing trade is a success. Let me say that again because it's so counterintuitive it probably bounced off your brain. A perfectly executed losing trade is a success. Why? Because over a large sample, proper execution of a valid edge equals profit. That's not faith, that's mathematics. But you'll never get to that large sample if you're judging yourself by individual outcomes because you'll quit your system after a normal losing streak thinking it doesn't work. A poorly executed winning trade is a failure that temporarily paid you. You got lucky. You broke your rules and made money, and now your brain thinks breaking rules works. That's dangerous. That's how you develop bad habits that will destroy you later. The 7% know this. They know that process is everything and outcomes are just noise. The 93% are still keeping score wrong. They're counting dollars instead of counting quality executions. And because they're measuring the wrong thing, they optimize for the wrong thing. They start chasing outcomes instead of refining process. Now let me talk about something that sounds impossible until you experience it. The 7% have made friends with uncertainty. Every struggling trader I've met is at war with uncertainty. They're trying to eliminate it, control it, predict their way out of it, and that war is why they're losing. Because uncertainty isn't the enemy, it's the terrain. You can't trade without it. Trying to eliminate uncertainty from trading is like trying to eliminate water from swimming. It's the medium. It's what you're in. You can't get rid of it. You can only learn to move through it. The 7% have learned something that the 93% think is impossible. You can be deeply uncertain and still execute decisively. You cannot know what will happen and still take the trade. You can hold multiple possible outcomes in your mind simultaneously without needing to collapse them into one right answer. This is what I call probabilistic consciousness. It's the ability to think this could go up, could go down, could chop sideways. All three are possible. I'm trading because my system says the probability favors one direction over a series, not because I know what this specific trade will do. That's a completely different relationship with knowing than most people have. Most people think knowing means certainty. I know this will happen, but in trading, knowing means understanding probability. I know that over 100 trades, this setup produces a positive expectancy. I don't know what this individual trade will do, and I don't need to know. That distinction is everything. The 7% are comfortable saying, I don't know what will happen next. The 93% can't tolerate saying that. They need to know. They need to feel certain. And that need makes them see certainty where it doesn't exist. They convince themselves they know. They manufacture false confidence. And then when the trade doesn't work, they're shocked. But you told yourself you knew. You created a story of certainty in a domain where certainty doesn't exist. The 7% skip that step. They don't tell themselves stories about knowing. They acknowledge uncertainty and trade anyway. And that acknowledgement, that honesty about not knowing, that's what allows them to adapt when things don't go as expected. They're not surprised when a trade doesn't work because they never expected it to work. They gave it a probability of working. And this time, probability didn't land in their favor. Next trade. Here's a skill nobody teaches, but everyone in the 7% has mastered. The art of losing gracefully. They can take a loss faster than 93% can take a profit. They don't negotiate with their stops. They don't bargain with the market. They don't try to give it a little more room. The stop gets hit, they're out, next trade. No drama, no story, no emotional processing, just execution. Why is this so important? Because the biggest account killers aren't the losses you plan for, they're the losses you refuse to accept. A trader can survive 100 small planned losses. Those are just the cost of doing business. They can't survive 3 losses they refuse to take, becoming catastrophic. Think about that. Your account isn't destroyed by your system's losses. It's destroyed by the losses you fought against, held on to, tried to wish away. Every blown-up account has the same story. I should have taken the loss when it was small, but I held it hoping it would come back. That hope is the enemy. That refusal to accept reality is the enemy. The 7% understand that how you lose determines whether you can keep trading. Lose well, quickly, cleanly, according to plan, and you can trade forever. Lose badly, holding, hoping, fighting the loss, and you'll blow up eventually. Not maybe, eventually. The math is undefeated. If you hold losers and cut winners, you will go broke. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The 7% have made peace with losses. They don't fight them, they don't resist them. They accept them the moment they appear and move on. That acceptance is what keeps them alive long enough to win. And here's another distinction that separates the groups. The 93% are trying to predict what the market will do. The 7% are trying to execute their process regardless of what the market does. See the difference? One is trying to control the uncontrollable. The other is controlling the only thing they can, themselves. When you trust process over prediction, something magical happens. You stop needing to be right about any specific trade. You don't need this one to work because you know over 100 trades. your process produces a positive expectancy. This loss doesn't threaten you because it's expected. It's built into the model. It's part of the cost of doing business. But when you're trying to predict, every wrong prediction is a failure. Every loss is evidence you don't know what you're doing. So you can't lose gracefully. You can't execute consistently. You're judging yourself by the wrong metric, accuracy instead of consistency. The 7% have learned that consistency of execution matters more than accuracy of prediction. You can be right 60% of the time and lose money if you don't execute consistently. You can be right 40% of the time and make a fortune if you execute perfectly every single time. It's not about being right more, it's about executing right always. Now here's something you need to understand about the 7%. They aren't emotionless. They feel fear, greed, hope, regret, all of it. But they've learned to feel the emotion without letting it control their behavior. That's emotional neutrality. Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of space between feeling and action. When the 93% feel fear, they act from fear. When they feel greed, they act from greed. There's no gap. Feeling and action are fused. Stimulus and response happen simultaneously. But the 7% have created space. They feel fear and can still execute their plan. They feel greed and can still take their planned profit. They've learned that you don't need to change how you feel to change how you act. This is trainable. This is learnable, but it requires something most traders don't want to do. Repeatedly exposing yourself to the uncomfortable emotions while choosing not to act on them. That's how you build the gap. That's how you develop emotional neutrality. Not by becoming cold, but by becoming spacious. By learning that there's you, the awareness, and then there's the emotions you're experiencing, and you can feel the emotions without being the emotions. You can notice I'm feeling fear right now without becoming the fear. And in that noticing, in that space of awareness, you have choice. You can feel fear and still take the trade. You can feel greed and still follow your exit plan. The 93% don't have that space. They are their emotions. When they feel fear, they think I am afraid, therefore I shouldn't trade. When they feel greed, they think I want more, therefore I should hold longer. There's no separation. The 7% think I'm noticing fear in my body right now, and my plan says to execute, so I'm going to execute while feeling afraid. That's mastery. Not eliminating the feeling, but acting in alignment with your values, despite the feeling. So let me give you some immediate steps you can take right now to start moving from the 93% into the 7%. First, write this down. I am someone who executes a process in uncertain conditions. Put this where you'll see it every day. Every time you catch yourself thinking, I need to be right or I should have known, come back to this statement. You're retraining your identity from outcome-focused to process-focused. This is identity work. This is who am I work. And it's more important than any technical skill you'll ever learn. Second, before each trade, say out loud, I don't know what will happen, and that's exactly right. If this feels false, if you feel certain, don't take the trade. You're about to trade from false confidence. You've convinced yourself you know when you don't. That combination is magic. Uncertainty keeps you humble and adaptive. Trust in process keeps you executing. Together, they create consistent profitability. Third, make a rule. You will not evaluate your trading ability until you've executed at least 20 trades according to your system. Individual trades cannot tell you anything. This forces you to stop reacting to single outcomes and start seeing patterns over series. This one shift moves you dramatically closer to how the 7% think. Because right now, you're probably judging yourself after every trade. That trade worked, I'm good. That trade didn't work, I'm bad. That's insanity. That's not how probability works. 20 trades is the minimum sample size to start seeing if your edge is expressing itself. Anything less than that is just noise. Fourth, practice taking your stop losses faster. If your system says out at X price, you're out at X price, not X plus 5 ticks. Not, let me see if it bounces here. X means X. Speed drill yourself on this. Set a timer. See how fast you can exit when your stop is hit. The faster you can accept being wrong, the closer you are to the 7%. They're not better at being right. They're better at being wrong quickly. That speed is what keeps them alive. That willingness to accept reality immediately is what protects their capital. Fifth, when you feel strong emotion during a trade, fear, greed, urgency, practice this. Notice the emotion, name it, I'm feeling fear right now. Feel where it lives in your body, and then ask, what does my process say to do? Separate the feeling from the action. Do this consistently, and you're building the gap that defines the 7%. You're training yourself to have space between stimulus and response, and in that space is freedom. In that space is choice. In that space is the ability to trade profitably. Now let me bring this all together because we've covered a lot of ground, and I want you to walk away from this with absolute clarity. You walked into this video believing that the 7% of traders who make money have some knowledge you don't, some discipline you lack, some secret edge you need to find. But what you've discovered is far more profound and far more actionable. The 7% aren't smarter than you. They're not more disciplined. They don't have better information. They've simply learned to operate by completely different psychological rules than the 93%. You learned that they think in bets, not trades, seeing any single outcome as statistically meaningless while trusting their edge over a series. You learned that they've made friends with uncertainty instead of being at war with it, developing what I call probabilistic consciousness, where they can hold multiple possibilities without needing to know which will happen. You learned that they've mastered the art of losing gracefully, taking stops faster than most people take profits, understanding that how you lose determines whether you survive. You learned that they trust process over prediction, which frees them from needing to be right about any specific trade. And most importantly, you learned that they've built emotional neutrality, not the absence of emotion, but the space between feeling and action that allows them to feel fear and execute anyway, feel greed and stick to their plan anyway. Here's what I need you to understand. You're not outside the 7% because you're not good enough. You're outside because you've been trying to get in by the wrong door. You've been working on your technical skills when you should have been working on your psychological infrastructure. You've been trying to know more when you should have been learning to be okay with knowing less. You've been trying to control outcomes when you should have been learning to manage your response to outcomes. The door you've been pushing on is locked. But there's another door, and it's wide open. It's the door of psychological transformation. The 7% aren't better traders in the technical sense. They're better humans under pressure. They've learned to hold their own minds differently in uncertainty. They've learned to separate their identity from their outcomes. They've learned to lose without it meaning anything about them, and win without getting attached to always winning. These are learnable skills. These are trainable capacities. But they require you to stop working on your trading and start working on yourself. They require you to stop trying to change your results and start trying to change your relationship with uncertainty, with being wrong, with not knowing. Here's my promise to you. If you take the 5 steps I just gave you and practice them for 30 days, really practice them, not just intellectually understand them, you'll notice a shift. Not in your P&L necessarily, not yet, but in how you feel when you trade, in your relationship with uncertainty, in your ability to execute without internal conflict. And that shift, that internal transformation, that's what creates the external results. The money is downstream from the psychology. Always. The 93% are trying to change their results directly. They're trying to force profitability through effort and study and discipline. The 7% changed their psychology and the results took care of themselves. That's the secret. That's the whole game. You don't join the 7% by trading better. You join by becoming different. And here's what's beautiful about this. You don't have to become someone else. You don't have to develop some personality you don't have. You just have to unlearn the things that are keeping you trapped. You have to let go of the belief that outcomes define your worth. You have to release the need for certainty before acting. You have to give up the war with uncertainty and make peace with not knowing. These aren't things you have to add, they're things you have to subtract. The 7% aren't carrying more than you, they're carrying less. Less need to be right, less attachment to outcomes, less anxiety about uncertainty. They've unlearned the things that were taught to them by a world that doesn't understand probability. If this landed, if something shifted in how you see trading and yourself, hit that like button, not for me, for yourself. Mark this as the moment you stopped trying to beat the market and started trying to master yourself. Because that's what this is really about. Trading is just the vehicle. The real journey is becoming someone who can hold uncertainty without breaking, who can be wrong without it threatening your identity, who can execute cleanly when every emotion is telling you to do something else. That's the transformation. That's the work. Drop a comment and tell me which of these lessons hit you hardest. Was it thinking in bets instead of trades? Was it making friends with uncertainty? Was it learning to lose better? I want to know, because your insight helps other traders see what they're missing. Your moment of recognition might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Someone reading your comment might have their breakthrough because you were willing to share yours. And if you want to keep going deeper, if you want more content on the psychology that separates the 7% from everyone else, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore about how your mind works under pressure and how to build the internal infrastructure that allows you to thrive in uncertainty. How to develop the gap between feeling and action. How to build trust in process when your emotions are screaming that you should override your plan. How to maintain consistency when you're in a losing streak and every part of you wants to change something. This is the work. This is what matters. Remember, you're not broken. You're not lacking talent. You're just playing by the wrong rules. Today, you learned the right ones. Now go practice them. Go get in the water. Go be uncertain and trade anyway. Go lose gracefully and move on quickly. Go build that gap between feeling and action. Go become the kind of trader who operates from process instead of prediction, from probability instead of certainty, from self-awareness instead of self-judgment. That's how you join the 7%. Not by knowing more, but by being different. And you can start that transformation right now with the very next trade you take. I'll see you in the next one.